So, good day, everyone, and welcome to another episode of All Things M365 Compliance. My name is Nikki Chappell. I'm a Microsoft MVP and Principal Cloud Architect at Cloudway, and I'm passionate about Microsoft Purview and everything data security, governance, and compliance. And always, I'm joined by my co-host, Ryan. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you very much, Nikki. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. My name is Ryan John Murphy. I'm a former Microsoft MVP. I'm a data security champion here at Microsoft, and I'm also an e-discovery advocate. And today, as you can see, we're joined again by a friend of the channel, Ewelina. Ewelina, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for inviting me onto the show again, guys. So my name is Ewelina Paczkowska. I'm a solution architect at a company called Threadscape, where I mainly work on Purview projects. So I'm another one of those really passionate people about Purview and another IT geek in general as well.
So, thank you again for joining us. And Ewelina, just to let people know, Ewelina's got an amazing blog, Welka's World, where she provides really pragmatic advice, mainly around Purview, data security, governance, etc. And today we're going to be talking about one of her latest blogs, all about common mistakes you make with data loss prevention. Because I think people think data loss prevention, just switch it on and it's all going to go happily along its way. But there are a lot of things that you need to consider along the way. So, hand over to you. How did this blog come about? And tell us all about it.
Sure. So, I mainly post about Purview, but it's really about anything Microsoft security related. And most of my projects that I do as part of my job are just around implementing sensitivity labels, data loss prevention, insider risk management, and so on. And I often kind of hear it from the clients that, oh, surely it cannot be this hard. But, well, surprise, surprise, I think we all know that Purview is just full of many different caveats. And if you don't really know what you're doing, if you don't really have much experience putting those policies in place, it's very easy to make a mistake. And Purview is just one of those solutions that you cannot just switch it on, implement it for the organization, for the entire organization, and kind of hope for the best. There are a lot of different planning and strategizing that need to take place first before you actually go and create your policies. So I just decided start launching this series about common mistakes that I see people make with different types of services and products under that Purview umbrella. So I started with sensitivity labels, and it was really well received. I got amazing feedback from the people within the community, and also people kind of starting off within the cybersecurity space. So then I just decided to just keep going with it on that same team and then do the same for the data loss prevention. So obviously the two blog posts are now up on the website, but there will be more of them in the future.
Perfect. And we will link them in the bio below for everybody who's watching and listening. So I think let's get started then, Ewelina, because I think we're definitely going to max out on the time that we've got scheduled for today. And let's just see if anybody's watching or reading this and they come across anything that Ewelina is going through today. Let us know in the comments. Let us know what your challenges are, because I'm sure between the three of us, we've seen many different flavors of different challenges, but they all map back to similar items that you've got in here, Ewelina.
Yeah, cool. And also, I think it's important to note for us as well that Purview or anything within that Microsoft security space, this is such an evergreen service. Things are not going to stay still. So there are additional features that are being added constantly to the service, and even to data loss prevention. Now, every single time that you might be logged into the Purview Admin Center and trying to create or edit a policy, you might just spot something different that wasn't there before. So I will try to stay on top of that and try and update those blog posts maybe quarterly, maybe twice a year. But again, my recommendation would be probably just to make sure that you check out Microsoft's official documentation as well for the latest advice.
Yeah, very much so. And there's a lot coming as well, just for everybody's sake. You know, we are doing a lot here at Microsoft. So great point there, I think, Ewelina, to start off with.
I'm going to be really cheeky. Is there anything you can spoil? Because I mean, you've got that insider info. So anything you can tell us?
Yeah, it's on the roadmap. Go and view.
Cool stuff, cool stuff. So I suppose the way that I built the common mistakes blog post is that I didn't really jump into the technical stuff, first of all, because I think it's really important for people to start planning that properly, right? So don't start with the portal, start with the people. This is something that I kind of thought about when I was trying to create some of the carousel posts that I also post on my LinkedIn and on all the other social media platforms, because it's really important that you kind of take that human element when you think about your strategy for data loss prevention or anything kind of Purview related. So the first mistake that I see people make is not planning ahead properly, right? So you need to come up with a solid strategy for that DLP, right? So take everything into consideration. So think about all the different use cases, the types of data that you might be working with, and kind of the main three mistakes that we can see on this list here. There's a little bit of an overlap, right? Because data loss prevention should always kind of come in after you put in some sort of an information protection in place. So whether these are just the out of the box classifiers that you check out within the portal and see what types of information you're working with, or maybe you do have some sensitivity labels in place as well. So once you've got those fundamentals covered, I think it's a little bit easier then to go and build your data loss prevention policies at the back of those labels or at the back of those classifiers as well. But again, it does require a little bit of planning. As we all know, data loss prevention can be very complex as well. So within a specific data loss prevention policy, you can have one or multiple DLP rules within it as well. So it's up to you really to decide whether you want to put them into one specific policy or whether you want to split them by different workloads or by different scenarios or your use cases. Again, there's no kind of right or wrong. I think the bottom line is that you know exactly how you are going to be managing them going forward and to make it kind of as easy as possible for you and your team as well. Because again, it's not just about switching that on and hoping for the best. It's about everyone being on board with the idea while you are actually implementing DLP, and how are you going to manage those policies going forward and manage those alerts that are being generated as well.
Can I just say on that, I think that's a very good point, well made. And I think that's one thing that I see either misunderstood Ewelina and Nikki or just not cared about enough, specifically when you've already got a DLP solution in place with a third party and you want to bring those DLP policies and rule sets into Purview. Often I see the mindset of, I'm just going to bring everything as it is from this third party into Purview. And a lot of the time, you actually don't need that many policies and rule sets if you think about it logically. So I think from a design perspective, I'd ask yourself, how important is your DLP design? Because I would imagine if you've gone through it in enough consideration and concentration, it should be very high up on your priority list for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Cool. So I'll tell you what, I'm just going to scroll down a little bit because again, some of these at the top would be more or less mistakes. Again, not very technically related. It's just about the fact that you do need to plan accordingly for it and try not to overcomplicate things with sometimes unnecessary restrictions, right? And I kind of have it somewhere down the line as well, but I suppose the main mistake that I also see people make is the fact that if you are going to allow a lot of different people to have like an override options and they're going to use it every single time that one of their actions is blocked, well, then perhaps you should just exempt them from a specific policy altogether. Because like, what's the point of trying to block something if you're allowing your end users to override it every single time that they're blocked from doing something specific? To give you an example, like obviously I have a background in working in accounts, right? So if you have a policy that is blocking people from sending financial information outside of the organization, while people within a finance department, this is their day-to-day operation, right? You cannot really block it for them. And the thresholds that will be applicable to those specific people in those departments that do require that specific task to be carried out on either a daily basis or a weekly basis, you cannot really block it for them. So unless you are ready to maybe come up with a little bit of granularity and maybe set up a separate policy just scope to those users. Well, if you've got a threshold kind of for the entire organization, I don't think you should be including people from within that finance department in kind of like a general policy that you're building for the rest of the organization.
Yeah, completely agree.
Having kind of organizational wide ones, that's your minimal viable product, isn't it? That's your minimal kind of baseline. And then you've got to look at those different, I think, persona groups to make sure whether you kind of, whether you're relaxing it or whether in some areas you might want to increase the DLP threshold, increase kind of the restrictiveness of some areas.
Absolutely. And I think you do also need to realize the fact that you're not going to get it perfectly right on the first go. It's all about progress, not perfection, right? So put those policies in place. Don't put in 100 different policies at the beginning. Maybe put in 5. See how you get on with them. Monitor the Purview Admin Center. Or if you're bringing over the alerts to the Defender portal, have a look at it. Test it maybe for a week and see whether that's enough or whether maybe that's not sufficient enough. And that, based on that initial testing period, you will then make a better informed decision about those thresholds and about the level of sensitivity or the level of restrictions that would be required for the end users. Next thing that I want to kind of raise is point number 6 or mistake number 6, neglecting to consider the fact that DLP is meant to prevent accidental data sharing. So I often hear it from my customers that, well, if someone wants to exfiltrate something, they will probably find a way. They will come up with some kind of shadow IT or in this kind of day and age, shadow AI is one of those lurking problems as well. Well, yes, you do need to realize the fact that if someone is meant to do something malicious, right? If they do have that malicious intent, you probably won't be able to stop them. So DLP is there to stop accidental data sharing and accidental data exfiltration. If someone knows what they're doing, they will probably find a way by taking a screenshot, taking a picture on their phone, and so on. So you're not probably going to stop 100% of different attacks and risks within an organization, but it's there to stop that human error element. Because we all know we're all human, we all make mistakes. Sometimes we're all guilty of putting the wrong recipient on our email that we're trying to draft and then send to someone. So it's there to kind of protect that information from going outside of the organization and go into the wrong hands when it's done in an accidental manner. And number 7, I think it's just so important, not only with the DLP, but also with any Purview solution or any security solution really, because you do need to prioritize employee awareness and training so that they know exactly what to expect. So if you put in DLP policy in place, sometimes, well, it's going to have a huge impact on the way that they go about their day, right? So you need to tell them why you are implementing DLP. Is it there to, harm their productivity? Obviously, your goal would be not to hinder that user productivity, but it's very hard sometimes to find that balance between usability versus productivity. So you do need to go through a period of training with those users, both with your administrators that will be actually looking after the DLP policies, but also the end users that their actions will be blocked. So you need to explain what is going to happen, maybe document that whole process, maybe come up with like a knowledge-based article, and then periodically also host those training sessions for the users as well, so that they know exactly what to expect, what to do if one of their actions is blocked, who to reach out if they have an issue, and so on. So you do need to have that in place before you actually go and implement those policies and push them out to the entire organization.
I think that's really important, the people part. And I think also once the policies are in place, feedback sessions, as you mentioned early on, like the exceptions, people in finance need to share that. Find out, if the DLP policies are causing them operational pain points, and then you can go back and review and adapt the policies to minimize the impact on those particular business areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you guys are also highly, highly experienced with anything to do with Purview. So you know how important that user training and user awareness piece is, not only for DLP, but thinking even of sensitivity labels as well. Again, Purview is not that type of a solution that you just enable. And it's not like onboarding devices to antivirus solution or anything like that, because it's got such a huge impact on the end users that they need to be aware of what's actually happening. And you're not going to get it right straight away. So that a refinement, feedback collection is so key as well. Okay, so just going through that list again. And again, I mentioned that a couple of times, but I actually do have it down on the list as well, that failing to acknowledge the fact that you will never get it right at first. So unless you're probably doing it about 1 million different times, but again, every situation is different. Every organization would be different. Every single user would have different needs. So you probably will never actually get it 100% right. Testing, I mean, again, we've mentioned that a couple of times now at this stage, so it's really key as well. Number 10, not realizing product limitations. I mean, there are many different caveats in terms of the sizes of the policies, the sizes of your rules, how many specific classifiers or how many specific labels you can use within your policy. And again, I probably wouldn't expect anyone to remember all those things by heart. I certainly don't. I know my memory is quite good at times, but still, I do need to check the documentation quite often just to make sure that I'm definitely taking all those things under consideration. But again, if you plan for it accordingly, if you plan for the naming conventions well ahead of you kind of creating those policies, then it will be a little bit easier. Of course, if you run into any of those issues when you are trying to create those policies, well, then you just need to adjust them accordingly and kind of adapt to the situation that you've got at hand as well. Moving on, license requirements. Again, a little bit of a gray area, I think, but as a rule of thumb, I think it's really kind of important to remember that at that Microsoft 365 E5 or E5 compliance add-on levels, you can avail of the data loss prevention for locations for devices and for Microsoft Teams. So these two are kind of the most popular ones that I see people a little bit confused about. So they wouldn't be available at that Microsoft 365 E3 license level. And now with the introduction of new workloads for DLP, such as the ones for Copilot and so on, there's a little bit more kind of new ones and granularity to it. But as a rule of thumb, when it comes to your cloud repositories, Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and so on, these would be available even at the Business Premium or Microsoft 365 E3 license level as well. But again, make sure that you go and check out Microsoft's documentation for the latest advice and the latest guidance on it as well. Number 12 is all about permissions. And Nikki, here I'm going to refer to one of your blog posts as well about the just-in-time access as well. So you have a really good blog post about the fact that the Purview roles or the Purview role-based access control groups, they're not natively supported by Entra ID's privilege identity management as well. So again, I like to follow the principle of least privilege and only give the specific permissions to the users that only need them, right? But again, the Purview RBAC is not natively supported by PIM. But you did release a blog post some time ago now at this stage about the fact that you can actually set up your Entra ID group, make it PIMable. I mean, I think Microsoft is making us add some additional words to dictionaries now and kind of adjust it accordingly as well. But you can make an Entra ID group PIMable and then use privilege identity management, but now for groups as well. So I think it used to be called PAG. The names keep changing, but again, make sure you go and check out Nikki's post about it as well. Number 13, failing to onboard devices to Endpoint DLP. I mean, this is kind of a no-brainer now at this stage, and I think most of the people that do work with Purview or do work with data loss prevention will be well aware of the fact that as a prerequisite for DLP, but also so many different features within Purview and within kind of Microsoft security as well, you do need to have your devices onboarded to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint and then enable that onboarding for Microsoft Purview as well. So even though you might be using a different antivirus solution, you still need to onboard your devices in a passive mode to Defender for Endpoint regardless.
Do you know where I see a lot of people fail with that onboarding? Testing users and testing devices, where they'll spin up test machines and the users will be sat there waiting for policies to kick in. It's like, well, have you onboarded them? No. So if anybody's doing any testing, make sure you onboard the device because you're not going to get those endpoint DLP policies if not.
And an interesting part here, and I don't have that mentioned within the blog post because, again, I wrote it probably a couple of weeks ago now at this stage, and it's an evergreen service, so everything kind of keeps changing. But these days, you now have the ability to assign policies to both users and devices when they're scoped to that location for devices. So have you guys tested that recently?
Not personally, no. Just one thing springs to mind as well is even though it shows the Windows emblem on the devices, we do support Mac OS as well. But read up on the information on that because I do know there is some limitations on the actual policy assignments and also the operating system that's used. It's not just for Windows. That's the misconception I see all the time.
That's a really good point. And I think it was announced this month as well that the macOS onboarding is a little bit easier these days now because of some enhancements to that entire service. Obviously, that's kind of more linked to the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint onboarding. However, that also will help with that endpoint DLP element of it as well.
I think it's also worth pointing out here that the onboarding into Purview is a separate step in the Purview portal. Just because you're managing your devices in Endpoint doesn't mean by default you've got access to that in the Purview portal. So just unfortunately, just a separate step in a different portal.
Yeah, well said.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I've recently sat the new SC 401 exam, which again, for Play to Unique, because I really love your series about exams and your carousel posts on social media as well, where you really kind of break it down and explain what's now in scope within the new version of the exam, which because of the fact that SC400 is being retired. But I've recently sat the new version of the exam when it was out of the beta version. And one of the questions was around an insider risk management policy. And I think it was just something to do with, in terms of the prerequisites. And it was a single choice question. 3 of the answers were definitely incorrect. And then the remaining answer was about the fact, what is one of the prerequisites or whatever. And then it was like onboarding to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. And I was looking for an option actually for onboarding to Purview, because again, these two things are separate. It's a separate portal. It's an extra step. So I've, of course, provided feedback to Microsoft that they perhaps should just clarify that or change the specific answers that would be available within the exam. But yeah, it's a really good point that you made. So not many people would be aware of it, I think. Well, I'm going to quickly scroll down. And again, speaking of those prerequisites, another prerequisite if you want to avail of DLP for your devices is to deploy the Microsoft Purview browser extension so that you can track user activity. So for example, if they browse to maybe some cloud storage services like Dropbox or WeTransfer and so on, and you want to block the upload of sensitive information to those cloud service domains, well, this is one of the prerequisites that you will also need to cover as well. So again, many different options how you can deploy that. You can also deploy it via Intune, just like you can onboard your devices to MDE via Intune as well.
I think it's important to note on that one. I know when I was reading one of the blogs on data security posture management for AI, and obviously having the Purview browser extension is important for tracking that third-party AI use. They do actually say that we need to now put the browser extension also on Edge for the IRM policies. It's not needed for the DLP policies, but you also need it on Edge. I think sometimes people think it's just for the third-party browsers. So yeah, always deploy it to Edge, Chrome, Firefox, and then ideally you want to block all other browsers. Otherwise, you're just giving people options to kind of bypass the rules, because it is just those 3 browsers that can be managed.
Very well spotted. And you can also do it on a Mac OS device as long as they use the supported browsers as well. I mean, Microsoft Information Protection Scanner for your on-prem repositories, I think not that many organizations are actually storing their sensitive files on-prem, but for those of you that are still allowing people to store files within your repositories on-prem, you do need to install that Microsoft Information Protection Scanner and then set it up accordingly. So again, best thing to do is just refer to official Microsoft documentation on the latest guidance on that as well. And you can also scope your data loss prevention policies to your on-prem repositories where you point it directly to a file path or a file repository. However, having that what we used to call an AIP scanner, now it's a MPIP scanner. You do need to have that installed before you can actually enable your policy. And we covered the fact that you do need to onboard devices to Endpoint DLP. So after you have your devices onboarded to DLP, it's not just enough to then go ahead and set up your policy scope to your devices as a location. You also need to go through additional steps. And it's the same for both the Endpoint DLP, but also in service management. So I do see many people kind of disregarding the fact or neglecting all those different settings that you do need to go through in addition to having your devices onboarded to MDE and to Purview, and then setting up your policies as well. So there are key kind of things that I would recommend that you definitely need to go through as well. File path exclusions for Windows, for example. So you do need to be aware of the fact that some of these file paths on Windows and then on Mac OS as well, these are excluded by default. So if you don't want to have them excluded, well, then go and modify your endpoint DLP settings as well. Another couple of them are the restricted app groups and service domains. So again, for that specific use case where, for example, you want to block the upload of sensitive information to the likes of cloud storage domains like WeTransfer, Dropbox, Box, and so on, you should be utilizing then the service domain settings with an endpoint DLP as well. And in case of having specific applications that maybe you want to put into a group, and then within your policy decide whether you want to block it or whether you want to allow them and so on, you can put them into a restricted app groups as well. So again, different kind of sub-settings within endpoint DLP settings that you can go and modify and customize based on your organization requirements. Always audit file activity for devices. That's a really good one, but I think it's now enabled by default. So it means that even though some of the devices might not have any specific DLP policy scope to them, as long as they are onboarded to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, and then as a result of that also onboarded to Microsoft Purview, all the activities going on those devices will also be audited and then recorded within the unified audit log as well. Okay. There are some additional features that you can deploy from that endpoint DLP element for your Windows servers as well. It's essentially just a toggle on within the settings. So again, for the latest advice, I would just recommend that you go and check out Microsoft's official documentation on it. Number 18, the endpoint DLP and just-in-time protection. I don't know whether you guys have much experience with that and whether this is something that you would usually include as part of your projects.
For me, I think I always highly recommend it. Most customers will be like, it's too much. But others, in fact, especially if coming from financial services, which is pretty much my background, heavily regulated environments, it's a must-have purely for the fact that it will always take into consideration that file, regardless of the time of creation, time of amendment, modification, and so on and so forth. So I think this is a great advancement to a customer for sure. What about yourself, Nikki?
Yeah, just the same as you, really. I think it's really important that it's at the time you're trying to send the file or share the file or the email. It's at that point we need to be checking for it. I do think this is going also back to that user adoption side, that if somebody press send on an email, there is going to be a small time lag before the email gets sent. And so it's just making sure you're aware of that. And I think you can set the settings for how long it waits as well.
One thing I've actually found with this, Ewelina and Nikki, is customers are not aware of it. Whenever I mention it, they're like, just in time. And they actually think about the just in time permissions enablement with PIM rather than just in time for the actual file evaluation. So maybe we can do a session on this dedicated to this in the future, just for everybody to be aware of it end to end. Cool.
I mean, there are so many different moving parts within Purview or even within data loss prevention that it's just impossible to be aware of all the different caveats and different little settings that you can enable or disable within those settings within that portal as well. I mean, it's just so comprehensive, so complex that I just don't blame the people that don't really go into that Purview niche because there's a lot in it.
Yeah.
And it's similar with that evidence collection as well. Again, for those heavily regulated industries or maybe specific industries that do need to collect that evidence on everything basically that goes on those devices, there is an option for you to set up that evidence collection as well. There are a couple of different prerequisites that you would need to cover in terms of setting up an account where you can actually store that information and so on. But again, just refer to the official Microsoft Docs in that case as well.
And just on that one, for anybody watching or listening, I'd be cautious about what you throw into here. I did have a customer that enabled this for pretty much everything, and then they got a big bill at the end of the month because of all the Azure stories that they use. So, really use this for these really high-end, really highly classified bits of information.
And I think you can also set up limits on the storage as well. So if you go over your limit, you get a notification as well, just so you don't end up incurring like a really expensive bill at the end of the month. Yeah. Number 20 is a funny one because that hasn't been working since November 2023. But when I do some of the assessments that we do at Threatscape, every so often I still come across a client that is utilizing the DLP options within the exchange transport rules, even though there's like a huge yellow banner at the top of the page, and then within the same line of that specific rule that is no longer working, there's a big kind of notification with a message telling them that this no longer works, but people still kind of have that in place and they're not rushing to get that migrated to the Microsoft Purview portal. So again, it's kind of heads up that if you do navigate to your Exchange Admin Center, your Mayflow rules, and you see something like this, well, then it's time to migrate that over to Microsoft Purview and use the modern version of your DLP policies, because whatever you've got in place in there, that hasn't been working, that hasn't been evaluated in nearly now 2 years. Number 21, I think it's becoming a little bit better because of the fact that Microsoft is now allowing us to change the policy names for DLP policies and DLP policy rules as well. But again, having that clear naming convention for both of your policy and also your policy rules is so key. I don't know about you guys. I think this is quite different from what people are used to. I do like using naming conventions. So I base my naming conventions on really it's probably derived from conditional access for zero trust and that persona-based approach that Klaus Jespersen, former Microsoft employee, came up with, but I really, really like it. So I do like knowing where a specific policy is coming from when I'm investigating an alert, and then I also like to split them by the workload. So I have a separate policy for Exchange, separate one for SharePoint, and so on. And then within the policy name, I know exactly what it's doing, what specific users are in scope of it, and so on. So is it something that you guys also do, or do you like calling them something different?
We'd have a very similar thing like that, with the location, who's the target audience, the information, very much like yourself. And I think it is important that you do split the DLP policies across the different workloads, because there's different actions that you can do and different conditions, so if it's an email, you can include, exclude domains. Well, in a file, you don't have a concept of a domain. So I think sometimes people just have a broad DLP, let's target all these different workloads, but yeah, they should be split out. And it just makes it easy to see, doesn't it? This. Also filling in the description. You've got a lot of characters. I think you said earlier on something like 1,024 characters. Put a little bit more information because you can go back and update it. If you've got a lot of policies and you need to do an investigation, having a naming policy makes it easier to find which one you need to look at.
Yeah, good point.
Absolutely.
I think
And
as well.
also,
Oh, go on, Ewelina.
sorry, go on.
I was going to say as well in the description, I think me and you've spoken about this a lot on the podcast, Nikki, is when you do make those changes, when you're actually fine tuning that policy, put in what you've done, version 1 equals this change, version 2 equals this change, so on and so forth. You're probably not going to be the only person that looks at that policy forever, and even for yourself, if you've got a lot of policies in there and you're going through fine tuning stuff, the override button that you mentioned before, creating a new policy out, put it in there for people to understand. But back to the naming convention, For me, definitely. I use a dedicated naming convention, and I highly recommend one because, like you say, if you're looking for stuff in Sentinel or Advanced Hunting or even just in the audit log, you can just essentially just look for that specific one without looking for global. I see that a lot, global DLP. But for what? What is it doing? What workload is it assigned to? So on and so forth. So, yeah, back to you. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I mean, just kind of to build on that as well, and I do have a common mistake with a specific number assigned to it as well, but I kind of just want to expand on it right now just a little bit. Apart from having that name and convention in place and splitting that by the workload, I think it just allows you a little bit more granularity. So you don't have to exclude like a specific department or a specific user from a policy that you've got covering all the different workloads. Like maybe you have email, SharePoint, and OneDrive in one policy. Well, then you're going to exclude that specific user from all of those workloads. So if you split them so that you have a separate one for Exchange, maybe you only need to put in an exception in place for that specific workload as well. So again, that granularity that it allows you, it's so important as well.
Agreed.
22, not aware of the DLP policy setup caching issues. I mean, I think we've all been there. It's getting better because now we can basically rename the policy, but if you don't really know what specific conditions go in first, if you don't really know about your naming conventions, or you maybe just are trying to test something and you come up with a name test or custom policy or whatever, and then you're trying to save your policy and it goes into that loop where that policy name already exists. So you go back and maybe you change it, but then your DLP policy rule name already exists and ends up in that never ending loop. So it's always best to, again, have that clear naming convention. And if you do run into that loop issue, it's best, I think, to just cancel and start that policy from scratch and remove any kind of caching or cached policies that have been saved without any kind of policies in place as well. It is something that really frustrates me. I do wish that the wizard was a little bit more user friendly. It is getting better. However, I don't think we're quite there just yet. So cool. And we've covered number 23 as well. So again, split them by the workload, because again, when you combine multiple workloads, the number of conditions and actions that will be available for you within the portal will just be the ones that will be available for all of those workloads within the scope. So Exchange Online will have the most amount of conditions and actions that you can apply versus, for example, something like SharePoint or OneDrive. So again, always a good idea to split them by the workload as well. 24, well, if you split your policies by the workload, you're not going to run into this issue if you've got a separate policy for Exchange and for SharePoint and OneDrive and then for Teams and so on. But you do need to be aware of the fact that some of the files that you're sharing in Teams, and again, Nikki has a really good blog post about it, like where is that data actually being stored, because there's a little bit of confusion around SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business and Microsoft Teams. So where is that data stored, right? So if you upload a file on Teams, it's actually being stored in SharePoint, or maybe it's within OneDrive and so on. So I think, Nikki, you might be the best person to kind of point people to the right kind of direction or to your blog post about this. I think when you set up your policies by the workload and you cover all of the different locations that you have available, then obviously you're covering all the angles. However, if you're only choosing Microsoft Teams or only choosing SharePoint Online, you might not actually include all the different workloads and protect your information from all the different angles as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important that, people don't necessarily know what the actual information architecture is in the background for Teams.
Wow, perfect. 25, and I mean, it's growing because, again, it's an evergreen service. So you can now set up a data loss prevention policy scope to a Microsoft 365 Copilot location. There's another one kind of being added. I'm not sure whether that's ready in the portal, but obviously there will be more DLP policies available for different types of Copilots now, with more kind of agents being use. So this is being definitely expanded on. But again, you can basically prevent files with a specific label being accessed by Microsoft 365 Copilot. And I keep referring to that like a Copilot for Microsoft 365, but it's been renamed again. So
one thing to point out with this, because this was written a couple of months ago, and as you said, like this is evergreen, in the supported, unsupported features where you've got Microsoft 365 Copilot chat is supported. Now, Word, Excel, PowerPoint is also supported. So if you've already created your policy, you don't need to update it. So Microsoft have confirmed that has now been added in as well, because that was an important gap, I think, to start off with. They only kind of worked in the chat, but yeah, it's more comprehensive now.
100% in a nice spot as well. And again, as I said, I've wrote this blog quite some time ago now at this stage, so it does need an update. But I'll try and stay on top of the changes. It's hard to though. So again, it's number 26 is all about underestimating the importance of policy and policy rule priority again. So again, it kind of depends what way you set up your policies and your specific policy rules as well, but that priority number actually matters, right? So whether this is just for the policy rule within a specific policy or whether just the policy itself, when you look at that from the list point of view and so on. So again, you can read up on it. I'm not really going to dive much deeper into it, but just be careful that if you, for example, have similar conditions or similar sets of restrictions that you wish to apply, that priority is also going to matter as well. Do you guys want to add anything to that specific mistake?
I could spend all day on this one, so stop me where you need to. But I think this is, again, something that always trips a lot of people up, where they've got the wrong rule and the wrong priority. Again, going back to your override button before, I think, Ewelina, having that in the middle, or having that in a place where you don't want it to trigger or you do want it to trigger, that is something that I see a lot with people who are building policies and rules out, where they've got them in the wrong order and they're saying, oh, well, this is, it's unexpected behavior, Ryan, that I'm seeing. Well, it's not. It's just that you've got the ruling the wrong way around. It's simple to fix as well, because you can just click on it and put it up to the right place of where it needs to be. Again, going back to my earlier comment at the beginning, is the design of your DLP environment is so important for you to do. And even if you just want to test out with test DLP policies and rule sets, just to give yourself a flavor of what the expectation is from a Microsoft perspective. We are very different to third parties. Why wouldn't you want to do something within Purview if you're paying for the licenses, of course? So I would always say, ensure your design is properly done and ensure your policy and rule sets are absolutely on point to where you need them, specifically around the priorities. So good point in your blog there, I think, for sure.
Perfect. And I think it will tie up with another common mistake that I see people make as well. I'm not really sure what number is that, but if you've got it that stop processing more rules within one of your policy rules as well, obviously that's going to have an impact. So you do need to plan for that priority number as well. I think had one client in financial services that was using it, but again, the DLP rules were very complex, and there was probably about 10 different rules within a single DLP policy, and they were split by the workload and by departments and so on. So there was a lot of different granularity to it. So it definitely took me a little bit of time to kind of even write it out and plan the order, so we're not actually breaking anything and we're not impacting users too much.
A great thing for that is using Visio or some type of workflow in SharePoint and PowerPoint to understand your actual workflow. And again, not to go over the same point, this goes back to your design piece. You've got to make sure that the design of your DLP policies and rule sets is absolutely on point before you even start touching Purview.
Yeah, 100%. Number 27, we sort of covered before. And again, when you're building your policies, the conditions that you add, the order in which you add them, that also matters as well. Otherwise, you will probably get a client error message at some stage. So if you, for example, build upon a DLP policy that will prevent maybe someone from sharing information outside of the organization, and that information will be based on either a sensitivity label or a specific classifier, well, that share information with people either inside or outside of the organization as a condition needs to go to the top before you actually add your content contains condition and then add your label or your classification as well. And again, it all kind of comes down to having enough experience with it, working with it for a little bit to kind of get in maybe a little bit more comfortable with it. So once you go through it a couple of times, I'm sure you will then remember which condition goes kind of first as well.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Lena. Can I just say one thing as well? I'm not too sure if you've got it in there as well. Is using the summary toggle. Like, I'm such a stickler for using that toggle. When I'm building my condition now, I know what's there, but I want to, when I click the summary on, I want to see that in a theoretical order without actually all the mappings of the configuration. I see that underutilized so much, and it's such a better way for you to actually read through what your conditions and actions are within that particular rule. So if you are building something out from a conditions perspective, make sure you use that summary. I always go to that. What about you two?
Yeah, I like to see things in a pictorial form as well. So yeah, I like to use that. And as to your point earlier, I like to use Visio flow diagrams, to look at all the logic, or even just map it out on a piece of paper or on a whiteboard. Try and work out, which scopes of the users, circles, Venn diagrams, types of things as well. I think that makes it so much easier to understand, because where you've got all the boxes open when you're creating the rules, it is quite long. You're not going to see all the information on one screen. So just click summary, condenses everything, so you kind of get that view on a page.
Yeah, and I think it also becomes really, really important. And I do have a summary in here. And again, I mean, the list of mistakes, like, is probably over 50. There we go, number 36. When you are nesting different conditions, I think it's so important to use that quick summary button, because that's where you can also see whether you're nesting those groupings properly or not. I don't know about you, but it's not very intuitive within the wizard to see what specific group are you adding something to. You do need to kind of click on that quick summary to be able to see whether you're actually closing that, what I kind of like to call sometimes a bracket. So if I see those lines on the outside, I know that I've built it properly.
Yeah. And again, that's another thing that I see either misunderstood or not used at all, where somebody's trying to build out a complex rule with many different operators and operating groups, or nested groups, as you just referred to them, Ewelina, and you end up in this scenario where you've got single line items that it's got to go for as a single unit rather than a grouping of units, a actual unit of grouping like you've got there. And the one thing I always say is follow the left-hand side gray line, and if that gray line creates all of the rule in one, you've got what you need to do. Where you've got your Boolean statement in the middle of it, or again, really good aspect, and then you've got your not statement after that as well. The amount of times I see this misused or not used at all, and customers come to me and say, this rule is not working properly. I don't think Purview's for us. And it's like, well, let me take a look at your rule. And I look at the rule, and it's just got that 10 items as a single line item. It's like, how is it meant to understand what you want it to do if you're not grouping into the right operating properties properly? It's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think we could be all talking about DLP for hours on end, because I mean, it's just so complex. But as I said, there are a lot of different recommendations and kind of mistakes that I point out within my blog post. And again, the list goes on. So there's over 50 of them. We're kind of getting into the more technicalities of it and what operators to use, what specific sub settings to use. So not really sure about you guys, whether you kind of want us to be diving a little bit deeper into it. I think people kind of get a really good idea in terms of just kind of go through that design process, plan it accordingly, and then kind of look at the wizard, at the different settings that you can see within the wizard itself. Read it properly, because not many people even realize that some of those options are there, because they just go add a condition, add an action, and that's it. Maybe user notifications are enabled, but there are so many little check boxes that are quite hidden or maybe just down on the list that people don't really often notice. So again, many different kind of recommendations. Always good to check out Microsoft's documentation for the latest guidance on it. But if any doubt, I think resources on our blog platforms or on our social medias are quite good as a reference point as well.
Yeah, just go back to number 44 there, please, Ewelina. Now, this is something that, again, I see a lot, right? Either a misconception of or a misunderstanding of. And I'm glad you've highlighted the bottom two there. If you're in a position where you need to split out who can see what from a triaging perspective. So let's say, for example, you want the rule to go to somebody that has, just a first line reviewer, if you like. But on the second element of that, if it's more highly sensitive information and you want that information to go through to that triage, but you want the actual content, the actual raw document itself, then the bottom two give you that. Now, I've actually been in a scenario where when the bottom two have been clicked, it's caused an oversharing perspective, because what it's done is basically fired off the alert as you would expect it to do, and it's given the whole surrounding text of the credit cards or the information plus the document or the email. If you don't want that, you simply just untick the bottom two there. That's as easy as it needs to be. The amount of people that I see screaming online about this, saying, it's an oversharing problem that Purview creates. It's not. It's just simply the fact that you've either not read through the rules in here from an incident perspective, or you've just gone what everybody else has done, you just clicked every single item because you think you need every single item. So if anybody's listening or watching to this, if you want it, they need to be ticked. If you don't want it, they will need to be unticked. So another great point from you, I think, there, Ewelina.
And again, it's so easy to miss those things when you're just setting up a DLP rule. If you're only doing it for the first time, or maybe, you haven't deployed it in other organizations and you're just doing it internally for your employer, it's very easy to miss that type of stuff because you wouldn't be used to it. You wouldn't really know. You wouldn't be really reading into it and checking out every specific subsetting that is visible within the wizard. So that's a really good point that you made there as well, Ryan.
Yeah, great. And I think that's probably a good time to wrap up. We're almost at 55 minutes. And as you say, Ewelina, between the three of us, I'm sure we could talk until midnight tonight on this, never mind lunchtime today on this. But I think this is an amazing artifact. People consuming this is definitely going to put them into a right place of where do I start? What do I do when I've started? And also remember the fact that DLP is a life cycle, continuously growing. As Microsoft create more modalities, recently with Copilot, that wasn't there this time last year, sorry. So we've always got that evolution. I love what you've done here. It's brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Good time to wrap up then, Nikki, I think.
I think so. So thank you once again, Ewelina, for joining us again. So your blog posts are really, really useful. It's that pragmatic advice. Microsoft Learn documentation only give you so much information, and often it's spread across a lot of places. There's a lot to consume, and then pulling it all together to provide this type of information, it will help so many people. So thank you again for joining us, and we will see.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, and we will see everyone next time on our next episode.
Thanks for joining us. See you again.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.